Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namasami. This is a talk called Realizing the Mind. This is chapter 11 from the collection of Luang Por Sumedho's teachings. When giving talks on meditation, one really says the same things over and over. But it's necessary to do so because we keep forgetting over and over and have to keep being reminded. Remember. What we remember, we forget. If you have nothing to remember, you have nothing to forget. In meditation, we're moving towards where there is nothing to remember, nothing to forget, which doesn't mean nothing, but a centering, a realization of ultimate reality, of that which is not conditioned. Realization is not gaining. You don't gain realization. You realize something which you have all the time, but never notice. Meditation is not a gaining process either. We're not here to make ourselves into Buddhas, Bodhisattvas, Arahants, or anything else, or to try to condition our minds into being Buddhist. You might think that you have to have a religious brainwash, throw away all your Christian habits and simply train yourself to think like a Buddhist. Wear the robe, try to look like a Buddha image, use all those Pali words and call yourselves Buddhists. That's just another costume, another act, another role to play. So the purpose of our meditation is not to become Buddhists either. Realization is what? Think. The word real. Realizing, recognizing, knowing, direct knowledge of ultimate truth. What do we mean by ultimate truth? We can say ultimate truth. We can use the Pali word Dhamma or the Sanskrit word Dharma. We can say the Absolute. We can say God. Whatever word one happens to be conditioned with is the word one prefers. Ultimate truth might sound a bit intellectual or not have the pull on the heartstrings that God has, but we don't quibble about terminology anymore. We don't care exactly what word we use. We don't try to find the perfect word to describe something which doesn't need any description, which cannot really be described, but can only be realized. We just do the best we can with whatever language we happen to have. Because the point is not to decide which terminology is the most accurate, but to go beyond the term to the actual realization of ultimate reality, God, the Absolute, or whatever. On the level of religious symbolism and convention, we can quibble about the Buddhist view, Buddhist Dhamma, Christian God, and be caught up in all kinds of interesting little differences and comparisons. For what? For something one hasn't realized yet, like the blind men describing the elephant. It's not the perfect word or the most accurate description that we need, but the intention to reach the reality. That one-pointed intention, that sincerity, that kind of earnestness that takes you to the realization of truth, Dhamma. So if it's already here now, you don't have to go around looking for it. There are all these nice stories about religious pilgrims, religious seekers going off to the Himalayas, looking for some saint living in a cave, or some mystic, some hermit, some arahant who lives in some remote valley or mountain crag and knows the truth. We must find that person because he's our teacher and he's going to give us that truth. We have romantic visions of ourselves suddenly meeting our teacher. We climb up some remote Himalayan mountain crag, breathing hard, the air getting thinner, and he's standing there with eyes bright, radiant with love, saying, "At last you've come." On that fictional level, we can create interesting visions and fairy tales about religious seeking. But the real journey is an inward one. So how do we go inward? Journey inside ourselves. We start looking for something, the ultimate reality, as something that we're going to find by looking within. So we think, meditation is the way. I don't need to go to India. That's foolish rubbish. I don't need to go to the Himalaya mountains. I can just meditate and find the truth within myself. And that's a very good idea. But what is the truth? And what are you looking for? Is the truth something? Does it have a quality that we should be able to recognize? The religious journey is what we call inclining to Nibbana, turning away, inclining away from the sensory world to the unconditioned. So it's a very subtle kind of journey. It's not something that you can do as an act of will. You can't just say, I'm going to realize the truth, or I'm going to get rid of all my defilements and hindrances, get rid of lust, hatred, and all my weaknesses, and actually do it. People who practice like that usually go crazy. A man I met years ago in a mental hospital had been a bhikkhu. This man had been a maha, meaning he'd taken all the Pali examinations. He went off to a mountaintop, went into his little hut and said, I'm not coming out until I'm perfectly enlightened. But he came out stark raving mad. If the journey is just an act of will and ego, of course, it takes you to madness. You keep bashing away, knocking about in your mind. With the ego, you're just caught in a trap. It seems a web of madness, hard to see beyond, or ever extricate yourself from. So meditation isn't something that we do to attain or achieve or get rid of anything, but to realize. So, what can we realize right now? You may think, well, I've been looking for the ultimate reality the whole time I've been sitting here, and I can't find it. What can you realize or know now, whatever state your mind is, whether you're agitated, having bad thoughts, angry, upset, bored, frightened, doubtful, uncertain, or whatever? You can recognize that this is what is going on now. That's a realization that now there is this condition of fear, doubt, worry, some kind of desire, and that it is a changing thing. If you're frightened of something, try to hold on to that fear and make it stay and become a permanent condition of your mind. See how long you can stay frightened. See if fear is the ultimate reality, is God. Is fear God, the ultimate truth? You can see fear. When I'm frightened, I know it. There's fear, but also when I truly realize there's fear, its power to delude me diminishes. Fear only has power if I keep giving it power. And how does fear have power? By deluding us, by making it seem more than what it is. Fear presents itself in a big way and we react. We run away, and then it gains power over us. That's how to feed the fear demon, by reacting in the way that it wants. The fear demon comes, a ferocious, nasty-looking demon, scowls and frowns, shows its fangs, and you cry, "Ooh, help!" and you run away. Then the demon thinks, this is a real sucker. But if you recognize the demon, you realize that it's a condition, nothing more than that. No matter how ferocious or nasty it might appear, it's really nothing. Simply recognize fear, the feeling of fear, as a condition that looks fierce and nasty. Then you begin to recognize that fear is just an illusion of the mind, conditioned. Desire, any form of desire, is the same. It seems to be more than it really is. Meditation is breaking through the illusion of the way things seem to be, by realizing conditions as they are, as changing, as unsatisfactory, and not having any personal quality, not any personal self or soul, as just things that come and go and change. You begin to stand back. You feel a space, a gap within yourself. After a while, things that once completely overwhelmed and demolished you seem more distant. You have a way of looking at them as if they were something separate, rather than what you are, what I am. Meditation is a constant realizing, a realizing of the conditions of mind as just that, as conditions of the mind. Ignorant people do not understand this. They think the conditions of the mind are themselves, or they think that they shouldn't have certain conditions, but should have other kinds of conditions. If you're a very idealistic person, you would like to be a good, saintly, intelligent, noble, courageous, the finest quality of human being. That's what I want to be. I want to be a very noble and fine person. Well, that's all very good. You have this ideal. That's what I'd like to be, the noble heart, the courageous man, the gentle, compassionate woman. All these are wonderful ideals, but then you have to face the realities of daily life. We find ourselves being caught up in becoming angry, upset, jealous, greedy, thinking all kinds of unpleasant things about people that we know. Thoughts and feelings we would never think or feel if we were the perfect human beings we would like to be. So then we start thinking, I'm so far removed from that ideal human being, that wonderful man, that perfect woman, that I'm hopeless, useless, worthless. Why? Because the conditions of your mind don't always fit the ideal. Sometimes we might be very courageous, very noble-hearted. At certain moments we find ourselves doing the most wonderful things, acting in a most courageous way. But at other times the opposite is the case. We wonder, how do such ugly thoughts come into my mind? If I were really good, I would never have such evil thoughts or feelings. But we can realize, without trying to become anything, that these conditions are just that. Whether they are noble, brave and courageous, or weak, wishy-washy, ignoble and stupid, they are still only conditions, dependent on all kinds of factors that we can't predict or control. Begin to realize that on the conditioned level of samsara, everything is affecting everything. We can't say, I'm going to isolate myself completely from everything so that nothing affects me, because everything affects everything all the time. On the conditioned level, there's nothing much that we can do except recognize, realize. Although we do have a choice. We can use our bodies for good rather than evil action. That's where the choice comes. If you're mindful and wise, you skillfully use your body and speech for that which is kind, compassionate, charitable and moral in relationship to other beings and to the earth that you live on. What goes on in the mind could be anything, maybe even the desire to kill somebody, but that is something that you don't act upon. You just recognize it. You can recognize it as only a condition and not self, not a personal problem. Have you ever had any murderous impulses, wanting to kill somebody? I have. I can understand murder. I've never murdered anybody, never come close to it, but I've certainly had murderous thoughts. Where do those thoughts come from? Is there something rotten inside me that I should start worrying about? Or is it just a natural tendency of a mind to want to annihilate something which makes it feel totally repelled and averse? That's natural enough. Killing is part of nature. It goes on all the time. Animals kill each other. Just listen some nights in the forest. You hear killing going on all the time. Rabbits screaming as the foxes grab their throats. It's a natural inclination. It's nothing abnormal. But as moral, responsible human beings, as religious seekers, although we might have murderous impulses, we do not act on them. Instead, we fully recognize those impulses as just that, as impulses, as conditions. What I mean by recognizing is the realization. They are just that. Not creating a problem, not making complications by saying we shouldn't have such impulses, or I'm an evil man because such impulses came through my mind, start creating a neurosis around them. Recognizing is just that clear realization as it really is, because that's what we can know directly, without speculation, without belief. So, that's a realization, realizing the conditioned as the conditioned. As we become more at ease with the conditioned, rather than deluded, reacting helplessly to conditions, absorbed into them, rejecting or annihilating them, we begin to be aware of the unconditioned, the space of the mind. You think that the conditions are everything, but they have to come from something. Since they are impermanent, where do they come from, and what do they disappear into? As you watch, you begin to feel or experience the emptiness, or the wholeness, or the unconditioned. Whatever word you use isn't quite it. We say, the unconditioned, that which is not born, does not die. That's a realization too, for those of you who have realized that. That's reality. The conditioned is reality, but the quality or appearance of a condition is not ultimate reality. It's only a conventional appearance, the way things seem to be on a habitual, conventional level. Buddhist meditation is the practice of being awakened, being Buddha by recognizing, by realizing the way things really are, as you directly experience them. Pain in your knees, feeling of happiness, any sensation, thought, memory or emptiness, without grasping, without selecting, picking or choosing. We develop the equanimous heart, the mind that is balanced, full, complete and whole, seeing things as they really are, no longer deluded by anything, by no thing or by nothing. When I talk about realization, do you see what I mean? It's a realizing. It's not a searching for God or ultimate truth as if it were something. Look at the word itself. You say God, and that makes it sound like something. does to me anyway. The word God sounds like something, somebody, as if it were a kind of condition. So you can only go so far on the religious path at the intellectual level, only as far as a belief. If you believe in words or ideas but never go beyond them, you're still caught in attachment to an idea about the truth, rather than knowing the truth. That's why the Buddha didn't teach any kind of doctrine or belief system. I hear Buddhists say, Buddhists don't believe in God and we don't believe in the soul. If you're a real Buddhist, you don't have any of that stuff. Souls and gods. Soulless and godless is what we are. But that's an annihilationist teaching. That's pure annihilationism. Disbelieving in God and a soul is just the opposite of the other, of believing. It's not a realizing of truth. It's only believing a negation rather than believing an affirmation. I meet Buddhists who were Christians at one time, but have become very disillusioned and become very anti-Christian. Because of that, they use Buddhism as a justification. They put down Christianity and think, those Christians believe in God. They're stupid, but we don't. And those Christians believe in an eternal soul, but we don't. We don't believe in that stuff. We believe in anatta, no soul. But that's not what the Buddha was teaching. That is also a trap of the mind, limiting, deluded us. That is also a trap of the mind, limited, deluding us. Realization is when you find out and know directly. It's not an affirmation saying what the Dhamma or the truth is, saying it's male, or the Dhamma is a man, the Dhamma is a patriarchal figure, the Dhamma is nothing, or the Dhamma is an impersonal essence, or the Dhamma is the essence of everything, or the Dhamma is everything and all. Taking up those philosophical positions, intellectual positions that people like to take about things they haven't realized yet. We're not trying to define that which is indefinable, but to know, to realize that which is beyond definition, beyond limitation. So our Buddhist practice is just that. We have to keep reminding ourselves because the force of habit is so strong. We so easily absorb into our thoughts and memories, into habits of looking for something or trying to get rid of something. We so easily believe all the opinions and views we have about ourselves and others and the world we live in. We believe so easily because some of our opinions and views are so sensible, so rational, so practical, reasonable, intelligent, brilliant. The brilliant views and opinions that I have. We're not trying to say that you shouldn't have brilliant views and opinions either. It's all right to have brilliant views and opinions, as long as you recognize they're impermanent conditions of mind. Don't exaggerate their importance. Also, don't feel bad if you're not very intelligent and have really stupid views and opinions. Don't worry about it, because that's just the same as the other, as far as we're concerned. Realization, rather than an affirmation or a negation. This way of realizing is what we call the middle way. It's mindfulness, meaning that the mind is open, full, complete. You're no longer taking just a fragment and attaching, obsessing yourself with one little condition, saying, this little condition, this tiny little insignificant opinion that I have, is the ultimate reality. What I'm presenting this evening, you've heard it over and over, is to remind you, for you to reflect upon, to keep recognizing, realizing. Work with the little things in daily life. Begin to really watch. If you're looking for something, if you hate authority, if some monk says, do this, do the dishes, and you feel resentment or anger at someone telling you to do something, that's a condition of mind. A monk says, do the dishes, and you think, how dare he talk to me like that? I've been meditating many more years than he has. I've written books on Buddhism. I have a degree from the University of Wisconsin, a PhD in Buddhist studies. And that nincompoop tells me to do the dishes? Keep recollecting rather than getting caught up in trying to figure out whether this system is the best one for you, whether all the monks are wise, enlightened people who have a right to tell you what to do, or feeling guilty because you become angry and you think you shouldn't, and all the other complex mental creations around things that happen during the day. We weave all these complexities around things. Don't make problems out of life's conditions, but keep recollecting. This way of recollecting, realization, is more important than trying to make everything just right, trying to straighten out all the monks and anagarikas, trying to make Chithurst into a perfect place where you feel that everybody is exactly what they should be. That's like trying to make everything in the world perfect, an endless, hopeless job. You cannot do it. Recognize, As long as things are adequate, use your life here for this kind of practice. Don't waste it on unnecessary complaining or fantasizing, projecting all kinds of things onto other beings, or feeling guilty because some of your reactions and feelings aren't what you think they should be. Do you see what I mean? The important thing is not trying to think perfect thoughts or act like saints, but to realize the way things are. What can be realized now is whatever is going on in your mind, in your consciousness, it's an immediate practice, here and now. Our form is always moral, which means not using our physical conditions or verbal abilities for harmful, cruel, selfish, or exploitive activities, but relating to each other in an active way with kindness, compassion, love. Relating to each other in gentle ways. If you can't love someone, just be kind to them. If you feel a lot of anger or hatred towards me, at least refrain from hitting and killing me. That's all I ask. Practice metta for those you can't stand and want to kill. It's all right to have those feelings, but just keep realizing them as feelings without acting on them. You're not expected never to have any unkind thoughts. We do keep within that physical limitation, always within the impeccable form of sila. Also, we actively help each other with dana, being charitable, kindly, considerate, generous with each other, which helps us to get along in a pleasant way. When we share and are kind to each other, life is much more enjoyable than when we don't. It's really much nicer when people are kind and generous than when they're not. At least, I find it so. However, if you can't be kind and generous and charitable, at least refrain from being evil, doing nasty things. Realize that everything that arises passes away and is not self. That's a constant refrain, a realizing. Whatever your hang-ups are, let them become fully conscious, so that you begin to realize them as conditions, rather than as personal problems. Let go of the identity of yourself as having problems with this or that, and realize that the problems we do have are conditions which come and go and change. They're not me, not mine. They're not what I am. You recollect continually until you begin to break through, until as you develop in this way, the mind begins to clear, because you're allowing things to cease. You're not reinforcing habits all the time. You're allowing habits that have arisen to cease, to end, and you begin to find a calm, an unshakable peace within yourself. This was a talk. In those days, nowadays everything is recorded, but in those days, Lumpur Sumedho had a distinct aversion to cameras and tape recorders. He used to say things like, "If I was king of the world, I'd take all the cameras and tape recorders and drop them into the deepest part of the ocean." And so it was quite rare for any talks to be recorded. And this was. One evening there was a woman who'd been staying at the monastery for a few days, and she was going to be going back to her home in Liverpool the next day, if I remember correctly. And so I went to Lumpur and said, would it be all right if we recorded if you give a talk this evening, would it be all right if we recorded it, because so-and-so is going back to her home tomorrow and she'd like to have a talk to take with her. And he went, all right. So it was. I was the one who put the tape recorder in front of him that evening, and I also transcribed this. Because as you can tell, it was a real lion's roar, and wonderful sort of delivery, and very insightful and helpful teaching. And there's a few particular themes in here that he would come up with from time to time, like as he begins. You might think you have to simply have a religious brainwash, throw away all your Christian habits and train yourself to think like a Buddhist. Wear the robe, try to look like a Buddha image, use all the Pali words and call yourself Buddhists. That's just another costume, another act, another role to play. So the purpose of our meditation is not to become Buddhists either. So he would often say that kind of thing. Or those in days of when he was living at Cittaviveka here at Amaravati, and he would make that kind of comment, like, I'm not interested in turning you into a bunch of bloody Buddhists. Literally, that's a quote. I'm not interested in turning you into a bunch of bloody Buddhists with a kind of as though Buddhist was a foul word. And because he would see that there's this, in a way, taking being a Buddhist as an identity was totally missing the point. That that's the whole point, is to use Buddhism to see through identity rather than I'm a Buddhist, and so making that into building up a sense of self, making that into a me or a mine, and so that he goes right at that from the beginning of this talk. So it's not just a matter of reconditioning ourselves or just adopting a reworked set of habits and adjusting our clothing and our haircut and our just sort of the language that we use, but he was really pointing to this capacity of the teaching to help us see beyond all conventions and all forms. The little piece about the fear demon. How does fear have power? By deluding us, making it seem more than it is. And then this image of the fear demon, ferocious, nasty-looking demon, and this reference is based on a story that's told in the scriptures. It's in the Samyutta Nikaya. I think it's in the Sakka Samyutta, about teachings about Sakka, the head of the heaven of the 33 gods, and how one day when Sakka was away from the palace, then this ugly little demon came sort of scampering into the palace and climbed up onto the Deva king's throne, and then just sort of sat there. And then so this tiny little imp, kind of really ugly, nasty looking thing. And then in the story, what happens is that then the Devas all get upset and say, "Get off there, get off! The Lord Indra is going to come back soon, and he'll get really upset. Quick, get out of the way. Who do you think you are?" And then as they get upset and angry, then the demon gets bigger and bigger, and more good looking, actually, rather than getting more ugly. But it gets more and more kind of powerful and good looking, and the more upset and angry they get, then the bigger and stronger the demon becomes. So this is kind of huge, powerful presence, and it hasn't said any words, but is not budging from its place. And then after a while, Indra comes back, and all the Deva ministers go scurrying up and say, "Oh, Your Majesty, there's this terrible demon has come and taken over your throne, and we don't know what to do." And he's sort of moved in and won't respond to any kind of threat or encouragement to get off the throne. And so then Indra says, "Oh, okay, very good. I'll handle this," and walks into the throne room and then goes up to the demon and says, "Oh, thank you very much for coming to visit today. I'm very glad that you're able to spend the time to come and see us. Has anybody offered you any refreshment, or have you been given a proper welcome?" And as he starts to talk like that, then the demon starts shrinking. And then as the Deva Raja kind of speaks to him and is very polite and friendly, then the demon shrinks and shrinks and shrinks and turns back into this really sort of ugly little pixie, and then he reaches over and gets a cup and kind of scoots the little demon into the cup and says, "Take that outside, would you?" So, and they take the little demon outside, and they're all the Deva ministers are sitting there, and without puzzled and amazed about this incident. And then the Deva king says, "So, do you know what that was?" He said, "No, what was that, Your Majesty?" "So that was an anger-eating demon." An anger-eating demon. So that the more angry you get, then the more more powerful and strong it becomes. And so it's a kind of fairy tale that you have from the scriptures, but it's also talking about how when we get angry with things or upset with things, we increase their strength, we increase their power. And that just as we were yesterday, I guess, or whenever it was, talking about metta, when you have loving kindness towards things, when you treat them with respect and a friendliness, then they lose their power to dominate the mind. So you also in this talk you have Lumpur going back and forth very happily, just talking about saying you can call it God, you can call it the Absolute, you can call it ultimate truth, you can call it what you like. You can say ultimate truth. You can use the Pali word Dhamma or Sanskrit word Dharma. You can say the Absolute, or you can say God. So, and he would frequently talk in this kind of way in these days, and so that would get into a bit of trouble, particularly with the sort of hardline Theravadins or other sort of more traditionalist Buddhists who would just quail at the idea of using any kind of way that any sort of theistic language could be brought into being a parallel term for Dhamma, and that they would consider this quite heretical. So many people have criticized Lumpur for using this kind of language. But it's also interesting, Ajahn Buddhadasa, who was a very famous and highly respected teacher in Thailand, also in Ajahn Chah's estimation, he was very highly respected, a very worthy monk. And actually Ajahn Chah's kuti, the only picture on the wall of his kuti where he used to sit, Ajahn Chah used to sit on this wicker, this bench, and then there was on the wall behind him there was one picture, and that was a picture of Ajahn Buddhadasa, so it sat right above his head. And so whenever you went to see Ajahn Chah and listen to him, he had Ajahn Buddhadasa kind of over his head. So that's the kind of esteem that he had for him. And he was Ajahn Buddhadasa was a very knowledgeable and broad thinker as well. He was very much a sort of orthodox Theravada monk, but he also had he was very widely read and very so broad in his understanding. And in Thailand, they had Christian missionaries in Thailand for about 400 years, but they have an extremely poor success rate in terms of converting people to Christianity. And so Ajahn Buddhadasa was one day, I guess, he was looking at the Bible in Thai, and the Christian people who'd printed the Bible had tried to avoid all Buddhist terminology, which is pretty hard because about 30 or 40% of the Thai language comes from from Pali. And so he was reading this and he thought, "Oh, this is dreadful. This doesn't make sense at all." And particularly, I think he was particularly struck by the beginning of the Gospel of St. John, which instead of in the English version begins, "In the beginning was the Word." In the Thai version, it comes across as, "In the beginning was the noun." Yeah. Which is better than "in the beginning was the adjective," but he thought, "Oh, this is dreadful." So anyway, he offered to help them translate the Bible into Thai. So I think you made a mistake trying to rule out all the Buddhist language, because it's impossible. But just use the terminology in a more effective way. So and then he helped them translate the Bible into Thai. And then he got invited to give lectures at a Christian seminary. So there's a whole little book of his teachings called Buddhism and Christianity, of lectures he gave at this Catholic seminary in Thailand. And he would translate the word God as Dhamma. That's how he said it's the best. When Christians talk about God, that's what we mean when we talk about Dhamma. So again, it would sort of cause a sharp intake of breath, both by the Christians and by other Buddhists. But to him, it was very matter of fact. So, well, if you look at what is being talked about, then it really is has many parallel meanings. Not God as in a sort of a deity with a long white beard, but when they talk about God as ultimate truth, then it's the same as what we mean by Dhamma. Let's see, what else was there? And also, the Lumpur, the point he makes here about people who, in those days, it was very common for most of the Buddhists that he met in the early days in Britain were people who had grown up there were very few Asian Buddhists around. Mostly they were British Buddhists who had grown up having been disaffected with Christianity, and so that they were, as he says, they become very anti-Christian, and they would have this, as he says, they were very disillusioned, become anti-Christian. They put down Christianity and think those Christians believe in God. They're stupid, but we don't. Christians believe in an eternal soul, but we don't. We don't believe in that stuff. We believe in anatta, no soul. And that's and he's kind of making fun of it. But it's also that's one of the main sort of misunderstandings is like, you believe in as he says, you believe in a negation rather than believing in an affirmation, but it's still just hanging on to a belief. And also it's kind of interesting that you can't find, even if you translate anatta as not self, there's no place in the Pali Canon where the Buddha says there is no self. He often says, the body is not self, feelings are not self, perceptions are not self, but he doesn't ever say there is no self, which is, and the one time he's asked that straight out as a question, is there a self, is there an atta, he remains silent, he doesn't answer the question. And then his interlocutor Vacchagotta says, is there a self? And the Buddha remains silent, and he says, is there not a self? Is there no self? And the Buddha remains silent. And then Vacchagotta just pays his respects and goes away and leaves. So then Venerable Ananda, who's always trying to sort of step in and fix things and help oil the wheels, says, "Oh, Venerable Sir, that was most unfortunate. Why didn't you respond to Vacchagotta when he asked that question?" And the Buddha said, "Well, when he asked me the question, is there a self? And if I had said yes, then would that be in accordance with my teaching that all dhammas are not self?" And I said, "Okay, well, it wouldn't really be in accord with that." And he said, "And if I said there is no self, then Vacchagotta would think, well, when I came here I had a self, and now the master says I haven't got one." So he would have left even more confused than when he arrived. So the best answer was to remain silent. So that when people say the Buddha says there is no self, that's actually not a fact. And then it might seem that it's an equivalent statement, but it's not really, because if you say there is no self, that's in a way making a declaration about a kind of metaphysical quality, something that's sort of beyond our vision. But what he says is, the body is not self, the body is not who and what you are. So it's more that the teaching on anatta is a method of exploration, it's a method of analyzing experience, rather than making it a metaphysical statement. Does that make sense? So it's like, it's a way of considering your experience, or the feeling of, well, I feel this is my body. Okay, let's look at that feeling of my-ness. What is that? What's that sense of ownership? If this was my body, I could make it be a certain way. I could say, be like this, don't be like that. I could say, don't be unhealthy, or I want to have more energy. And then the body, if it was truly owned by a you who was in control, then it would respond to your wishes. It would obey your commands, but it doesn't, because it's not you or yours. So the teaching on anatta is a method of exploration. It's a tool to examine the nature of experience, rather than a metaphysical belief. And then this, maybe the last thing to mention is this little phrase here. The important thing is not trying to think perfect thoughts or act like saints, but to realize the way things are. So, and this is at the end of this piece where he's talking about, don't be afraid of having nasty thoughts and having angry feelings, or feeling restless and jealous and so forth. And I think yesterday we were talking about not trying to be the perfect person all the time, or we create this idea of a perfect me and then attempt to inhabit that. But and he is pointing out very, very clearly here that it's not about never having unskillful thoughts, but the path is really to recognize, well, this is a thought, it's a condition. It might be an unskillful thought, but it is an impermanent condition. It arises, it passes away. So that was that got painted up on a few signs, or put on people's T-shirts, I think, as well. The important thing is not trying to think perfect thoughts or act like saints, but to realize the way things are. I think at Wat Pananachat they had that up on a sign. So as you arrive, in the monastery. But also, as he's talking about this ways of letting go of everything, and sense of just realizing the way things are, then also pointing out that even though it's just a matter of recognizing everything just as a simple condition to be let go of, then the way we guide our actions and speech is through wholesomeness, that which is unselfish and generous, kind, compassionate, that we use our actions and speech for that. Because if you talk too much on an ultimate level, just saying it's all impermanent, it's all empty, it's all just conditions changing, then what easily happens is that then the thinking mind starts justifying your impulses towards greed or selfishness or irritation. So it's all empty, my fist is empty, your nose is empty, what? You're annoying me, so I'll just bop you on the nose, it's all empty. If you don't realize that, it's your problem, wake up. This is a total wrong understanding, but it's not unheard of, unfortunately, for people to operate in that way and sort of justifying your own self-centered impulses with the sort of ultimate reality joker. You're kind of playing the escape clause, playing the joker that wins the trick all the time. That's it's called delusion. Michya-ditthi, wrong view in the trade. Any thoughts, questions?
With regard to not self, in the Sumedho Nikaya, the Buddha says, bhikkhus, I will teach you the all, and then he lists the 5 khandhas and says, this is the all. If anyone were to say repudiating this all, I will show another, he'd come to frustration. And then, each of the 5 khandhas are not self. So, I've heard before sort of people use that kind of line of thinking to sort of follow that through and say, well, there's no self. And I'm not saying that's my view, I actually am not sure where I stand on the issue, but I've heard that sort of cited before in that kind of logic of, the 5 khandhas are the all, the 5 khandhas are not self,
So, but the all is not self, but it doesn't mean to say that there is. It's not making the same. I would say it's not the same thing as saying there is no self as a declaration, but that you're looking at that. You're using that teaching on anatta as a way of looking at that feeling of ownership. So I'd suggest that teaching is still being used in the same way, but I'd have to take a look at the wording of it to be more specific. But I think, but just to being in the spirit of how the Buddha talks about those things, and how, like, specifically he avoids using that language when talking to Vacchagotta. That's just his usual way of speaking. It's like he's the anatta teaching is about holding up a mirror to those feelings of this is me, this is mine, this is what I am, and helping us to look at that closely.
I find for me that's that concept of thinking of anatta like as no self is an incredible sort of demotivator. It's like, well, why go through all this effort then? But I also have trouble. I've read talked to Ajahn Jeff a lot. Read lots of his books, but I have trouble kind of buying into any perspective other than that. Just and through my own limitation or what have you. So.
Well, it's one way of looking at it is that the Buddha is trying to avoid the idea of my real self, or the real me is. As a concept, even if you say, "Oh, I am the real me is the Dhamma," I am the Dhamma. That's what I am. Then it's the mind grabs the concept and there's a subtle forming of that conceit of I am this, and it's sort of grabbed onto the idea of that quality, which is very different from being awake in the present moment to a condition that's being experienced without any kind of attachment. It's like, oh, I've got the picture now. I am that. This is what I am. I've got it now. And then we hang on to the picture, like we was talking about the key. You rather than using the key to put it in the lock and turn the lock and get out, you end up kind of holding on to the key. Thinking, okay, I've got the perfect definition of what my true self is now, and missing the fact, even though there might be some kind of very eloquent exposition, you're still just holding a concept, and there's still a me who's doing the holding. So that the point of those teachings is to help the mind to stay at that quality of knowing, of awareness, rather than trying to get an idea, a perfect idea of how it is, but in a way just taking refuge in the Buddha knowing, the Buddha wisdom.
Ajahn Amaro.
Good evening.
Good evening.
How did I know that you were going to speak? It was a safe bet. Yeah.
Give me the possibility. I speak every day, all the time. I love communication. Communication is a nice thing. Silence is a beauty. It's better silent, no? But communication is very nice as well. So, Ajahn Amaro, a very small observation for tonight. You put in the air the last week one question. You left in there like, what am I? Tonight you speak a lot about conditions. It's a beautiful thing. I think the idea of I am a flow of condition, the flow of condition. This is I put in the air. Like you did. Thank you very much.
That's it.
Good evening.
Yeah, Mike.
A very quick question. At the beginning of this series of talks, I didn't get. I'm not clear if you're reading from a published book of summary of Sumedho's talks or what.
It's we've been preparing a collection of his teachings for his 80th birthday. So the whole collection is 5 volumes of all of his published books, most of his published books, and then a large number of articles, interviews and such that have appeared in different places. And so the first book is called Peace is a Simple Step, and it consists of his talks from Cittaviveka, from the book The Four Noble Truths, the book Now is the Knowing, and also some previously unpublished material, talks he gave at Wat Pah Nanachat in the 1980s, and an interview that he had with Venerable Kantipalo in the 1980s as well. That's the first volume.
Is that actually been published yet?
It is being. It's being proofread, if you have to know. It's all moving steadily. So with luck and a following wind, touch wood, it should be in print by July the 27th. Not to be superstitious or anything. So yeah, this is the first volume. Even if we have a reading every day for this 3 months, we won't get through the whole lot. Each book is about 300 pages long, and there's about 30 talks in each book.
Thought of once it is published, doing a summary of the 300 pages.
No. There's an introduction that sort of describes what what the source material is, where it came from. But you'll have to wait and see what it's like when it comes out in print. Okay. Andamayang dhammagata sadhukarang dadamase sa